So now as we continue our look at the path of human respiration, let's entitle the next flowchart, Human Respiratory System 2. And what we'll continue to look at is figure 42.24, which looks at mammalian respiration, very similar to what we've been talking about thus far. So, in human respiration, something that's worthy of mentioning is the following. All of the points that we've talked about, as we went through them, thus far, the entire system, from points 1 through 5 is where we ended off, I believe. Thus far, the entire respiratory system is going to be lined by what are known as, or with, ciliated epithelium and many mucus cells. Ciliated epithelium, that's structure to remember, and also many mucus cells. So, what does that mean? Why do we have many mucus cells all throughout the 1 through 5 that we've looked at thus far? Why do we have many ciliated epithelium all throughout the respiratory system thus far? Well, what we need to remember is that mucus serves as a very important sort of combination of material that allows for trapping things. Mucus specifically traps foreign material. It traps things that may be harmful and makes sure that they do not go any further than the mucus that's found within all of the respiratory tract. So that's number one. That's why we have the mucus cells secreting the mucus to trap the foreign particles. What about the ciliated epithelium? If you remember, cilia are these finger-like projections, and they're going to actually beat and push forward and contract, not contract specifically, but I should say cilia are going to move in a way that they push mucus towards the throat. Cilia, that's their job, moves mucus, that's all throughout the respiratory tract, towards the throat. So this is a purposeful upward movement of mucus throughout the respiratory tract. So we went 1 through 5. Basically from 5 through 1, you have these cilia going against the grain, pushing mucus upwards and upwards and upwards all the way up to the throat region. So much so that you're eventually going to get mucus being swallowed. Mucus will be swallowed into the digestive tract. And this happens constantly. Some people aren't even conscious of this because it happens so much and so often that you just get so used to it. The only time you really notice that this happens so much is when you get a sore throat and you're swallowing the mucus and you actually feel the pain of swallowing because of the sore throat. The reason why is because you're constantly swallowing mucus. Why are you constantly swallowing mucus into the digestive tract? Well, that's because this ciliated movement of mucus and foreign particles bound to mucus overall is a great way to prevent pathogens and bad air from entering the lower respiratory tract. So it prevents pathogens and also, let's say, harmful air or air that has a lot of foreign particles in it that's just not good to breathe from entering the lower respiratory tract. Because the lower respiratory tract and lower respiratory system has a very sort of a weak, it's a bit weak in the sense that it's not very good at fighting off infections. We know that the upper respiratory tract is very good at fighting off infections because that's really where colds happen. But in terms of the lower respiratory tract, like the lungs, you really don't want anything getting in there that shouldn't be there because it's such an important life harboring area that you want to make sure anything that's bad, like bad air or pathogens, really stays out of there. The cilia movement and the mucus trapping particles really ensures all of that. So this is basically a very nice innate defense, non-specific defense that mixes the idea of immunity and respiration very nicely here. So thus far, what have we had? We've had the nose breathe in air to the nasal cavity. Then we went to the pharynx, and from the pharynx, which was the hallway, we went into the larynx, not the esophagus, the larynx. Then from there we went to the trachea. The trachea branched, and branched into specifically what are now going to be referred to as bronchioles. So let's take a look at where we're at. We're going to start at 6, which would be the lungs. That's the next step. Remember, we stated the trachea serve as the pathway from the pharynx all the way from the larynx, I should say, all the way to the thoracic cavity where the lungs are found. The lungs are found or arranged in a pair. You have two of them. The lungs are very spongy material because they're very moist all the time, and they also are moving a lot. They're contracting, so they're very much elastic, and they are going to be found within the chest, or more scientifically appropriately referred to as the thoracic cavity. So we have a pair of sponges, they're both spongy, they're both elastic, and they're both within the thoracic cavity. What we're going to remember or notice is the following. Remember how we said that the trachea branches into two bronchi? Well, each bronchus, there's two of them, branches into smaller bronchioles. Branches into smaller bronchioles. So this is a theme of respiration, this idea of branching. And we see that even in large organisms like ourselves, much like we saw in the tracheal system of insects. So we have a bronchus, that's a large structure, that branches into a smaller structure, known as a bronchiole. And eventually, the smallest bronchioles are going to end their branching, and those smallest bronchioles are going to end in what are known as alveoli. This is a term to definitely remember. It's basically the functional unit of respiration. The alveoli are going to be tiny air sacs, and that makes sense, right? They're tiny because they're the smallest of branches at the smallest ends of the branches, so they're full of air with an enormous amount of surface area. So they are going to definitely be involved in lots of exchange of material, exchange of gases, an enormous amount of surface area. So now let's continue this branch word, this stepwise movement. So we end in alveoli. Each alveoli, so we're continuously getting smaller and smaller in terms of how we're looking at respiration. Each alveoli will be with a single layer of epithelial cells on it, basically. So these are outside cells, cells covering the outside of the alveoli. That's why they're called epithelial. They're all surrounding the alveoli, these tiny air sacs. And these epithelial cells will further be surrounded by a rich network, meaning lots and lots and lots of capillaries. A rich network of capillaries. And remember, capillaries, the capillary bed, basically has two sides to it, an arterial side and a venous side. And what we're going to notice here is that the epithelial cells will be very much in contact with this rich network of capillaries in order to promote and create a site of gas exchange. And this is going to be in big, bold, capital letters because this is what we've been trying to do. And we finally did it. At the very end of this tour of human respiration, we finally look at the site of gas exchange. Where is the site of gas exchange? At the capillaries that are going to be near the alveoli at the tips of the bronchioles that are branching from the bronchus, that are branching from the trachea, all of which is found within the lungs, the lower respiratory lungs. And that's our site of gas exchange. Remember, basically everything else before this point, before I wrote site of gas exchange, was just there to get air to the alveoli. There's a big effort to make sure that a perfect amount of air and clean air gets to the alveoli, as you can see through steps 1 through 6, almost all of 6, until the very end at which we get gas exchange. So that covers our look and walk through human respiration, the basic pathway, where we're now going to be focusing on less on structure and more on function, specifically on the idea of breathing as a whole.